Welcome to The Brain Dump, where we study the psychology of success. Join us as we probe the habits, rituals, and routines of top-performing artists, entrepreneurs, authors, athletes, and more to uncover the timeless principles we can all use to take our lives to the next level. Are you ready to plunge the grunge that's been gunking up your mind's eye? Great, then let's get to it.
Welcome to The Brain Dump. This is the podcast where we study the psychology of success. And today we have a very special guest, don't we, Austin?
Yeah, the best looking man in podcasting and coaching, Tyler Chesser.
Yeah, I got the face for podcasting. That's what they say. I appreciate that, man.
It's got a face for the radio.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's a pleasure to be with you guys, man. How you guys doing?
Doing good, man. So Anthony, you don't know this story, so I'll tell it just because I have to thank this man. So I've been thinking about doing a podcast, whatever. It didn't have a name at the point for 2 years. And I met Tyler at Best Conference Ever in February of last year through Evan Holiday. And Tyler and me were talking the whole day at the conference. And he's like, dude, if you've ever thought about it, like just fucking start it. And and so we started throwing around titles, and I'm texting my buddy who's a podcaster at the time, and he starts throwing around titles. And then I was like, screw it, like, let's do it. And so Tyler was like the first interview on the podcast. He kind of brained the idea, and now we're 160 episodes in 9 months. And, it's crazy. Like literally we got home from Best Conference Ever and I interviewed him like a week later. So so the fact that we're even here right now is actually because of this man. Dude,
that's badass, man. I appreciate that story. I honestly, all I did was unleash you, man. You knew the answer. Mm-hmm. You knew the answer, but you just needed an extra nudge, which sometimes we need that, right? So I appreciate you sharing that.
Well, let's stay here. I want to talk about this because this is interesting where, if we're talking about the psychology of success and like what gets people to where they are right now, it can be a really convoluted chain of events. But you said something there, Austin, where it was just like, just do it. If you've been thinking about it, just do it. But what is holding people back from just doing it?
Well, I want to answer that on a separate token. This is the same way I got sober. So my ex-business partner said, if you've ever been thinking about stopping drinking, just do it. Just try. And so that was what predicated I think I can do this. So that started the chain of events that started 26 days of being sober. Then I had a drink. I waited 30 days and then went from cold turkey to 2 years and a month now. So it was kind of that same concept in two separate different instances. Just try it, right? And get past your fears.
Yeah. And I think it is. I mean, the other thing that I see is it's really important with who you surround yourself with, right? And obviously there's all of these pieces of information that are coming at us on a daily basis. And I was just having a conversation with a coaching client right before this is we've got to guard the gates of our mind, because what makes it into our mind is what is planted, and that, is likely reaped, right? We reap what we sow, whether it's good or bad, right? It's like what Earl Nightingale said. If you plant nightshade, you're going to get nightshade. If you plant corn, you're going to get corn. So what is it? Who is it around you that is supporting sort of your future self? Or is it someone that's, pulling you back to your lower self? Or, because we all have both of those, identities within us. We have the superhero, the supervillain. And so are the people that you're surrounding yourself with giving you an inspiring future or an inspiring vision, or supporting your inspiring vision? Or are they holding you back? Or they, because we all have limiting beliefs. It's just a matter of, do we believe them or not, right? Do we give them power over us? And so I think it's powerful to spend your time with great people like this, listen to podcasts like this, because what you plant, you will reap, right? It will grow. So anyway, I'm rambling.
This reminds me.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Tony Robbins idea. I think I was listening to him just the other day talk about this, where if your worst enemy came up and put sugar in your coffee, what's the worst that's going to happen? You just have some sweetened coffee, right? But if your best friend comes and he puts just like a drop of strychnine in your coffee, what's going to happen? It's going to kill you, right? And so you have to stand guard at the gate of your mind, the coffee being the gate of your mind, because, it could be your worst enemy coming. It could be your best friend coming. You don't necessarily know where it's coming from, but you have to be careful about what you're letting into there, which then gets to the question of like, how do you find these people that are going to be putting sugar into your coffee. I guess if sugar is the thing that you want, sugar is kind of a poison in and of itself. So maybe that's not what you want.
Well,
I know.
I think, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I think at the end of the day, what's interesting, right, is those same friends that support you and are a springboard for you, as my mentor did 2 weeks ago, have to kick your ass too. But here's the deal: you have to be self-aware enough and love yourself enough to not take it to heart and understand that they are that those, let's say, kind words, they're not really kind, they're tough words, mean the best for you. And he said, listen, I had a mentor come to me 3 years ago who's worth $500 million say this exact same thing to me, and it changed my life. And I've sat with that conversation that he gave me 3 weeks ago for 3 weeks every day. Am I doing what he say I'm doing? Yes, I am. And so, but I'm not taking it to heart and saying, fuck, I'm not in the victim mentality, right? So
yeah, and what would your future self say, right? If you can tap into your future self at any moment, right? You can say, hey, is this advice serving my future self? Because sometimes advice that is serving your future self, which ultimately, if we can make decisions based on your future self, then we can make empowering decisions for our life, for our future, and all these things. But sometimes those are not comfortable, right? And another thing, you mentioned Tony Robbins. Another thing that Tony Robbins says is the more discomfort and the more uncertainty you can comfortably deal with, the more successful you're going to be. And it's like, all right, well, what do we mean by successful, right? Well, success is different for everyone, right? Earl Nightingale again said that success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. And to me, that makes a lot of sense, right? It's, hey, what do I want to create? Because we're all different. We all have different talents. And I want to surround myself, and I've learned this over time. At first, I'm like, all right, I'm going to defend myself if anyone gives me constructive criticism, or if anyone says, hey, here's some feedback. I really like to see you do X, Y, and Z better. At first, you're like fight or flight. Like, what do you mean? You're attacking my identity. But we've got to get out of that. And for me, it's been meditation. It's been, recognizing my own internal voice and how that voice then perhaps triggers certain emotions, and then separating that internal voice from me and saying, hey, I'm the observer of that thought, to the same with other people, and telling people, hey, I appreciate you. I appreciate that feedback. I really appreciate that help, because now I can grow. Right. And it's the same with ourselves, our conversation with ourselves. So anyway, I love it.
There's a couple of things you guys both said I want to unpack a little bit more and acknowledge here. So Tyler, you say this all the time, where I want to acknowledge you for saying this thing, or and it's something that I've taken to heart. I'm like, wow, that's a really powerful thing to say to other people. But I want to acknowledge you both, because Austin, what you pointed out there was, if you have friends that love you enough to tell the truth, that is one of the most powerful things that you can have in this world, but only if you're willing and open to hearing what they have to say. And so recognize that if they're sharing something and it's coming from a place of like true caring and love, then like it doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good when the people that you love point out where you're weak, but they're doing it because they love you. And that's a way for you to improve. And so you can't just like go into fight or flight, like Tyler's saying. You have to kind of emotionally distance yourself. I think meditation's a really great way of doing that. And then this idea of like, what would future you say? Tyler, that's incredible. Like this idea of like, at any moment you could tap in and say, what's future me think about this decision? And I was talking to somebody just the other day, and I cannot remember who it was, but we were talking about working out in the morning and how that's a really difficult thing for everybody. Like I struggle with it immensely, but it's so important, because when I do it, I feel better for the rest of the day. And this person, they said, yeah, when I'm laying in bed and I don't want to go work out, I just think about what's going to make me feel better at the end of the day. Looking back and saying I did work out, or looking back and saying I stayed in bed. And that's then what I do. If the answer is I'm going to feel better staying in bed, then stay in bed. Like, you need the rest. That's okay. But if it's I'm going to have felt better if I went and did the hard thing, then go do the hard thing.
So yeah, I interviewed a billionaire. He's a buddy of mine. Christopher Lochhead had a $4.5 billion exit, and he said something. He's crazy as shit. He said something at the end of the episode that changed my life. True story. He said, you know who I'm the most proud of? He said, my 21-year-old self, because that guy worked his ass off. He said, you know who I'm even more proud of? The 28-year-old version of myself who worked his ass off and sacrificed. And you know who I really, really like? The 38-year-old version of myself. He said this son of a bitch up like a gangster. And he said, because I love my life. I get to podcast. He's the #1 podcast host. He said, I love my life because all the versions of myself set this 50-year-old version of myself up amazingly.
I'll tell you what, one of the philosophies, maybe we talk about philosophy that I love, and I don't know who said this. I think, Anthony, you and I may have talked about this at one time, but it's such an important quote and distinction, is that easy choices equal a hard life, right?
Yep.
Hard choices equal an easy life. So the question is, do you want it now or you want it later, right? Do you want to compound the difficulties, or do you want to go through it, face your fear, and make things better, make things easier? Because is it our estimation of the fear, or is it the event itself, right? Is it because you're talking about working out, right? This morning I had to do a high intensity interval training workout. Did I want to do it? Hell no. Are you kidding me? That is the worst. It's a beast. But at the end, I'm like, thank God I did that, right? And now my day is easier. And when I compound that over decisions for, years, it's like, come on, man, let's go. I'll do the hard stuff because I think it's harder than it really is too,
That quote is so powerful. It's something like easy choices, hard life, hard choices, easy life. And I've been using that for the last couple of weeks, but I couldn't properly attribute it to somebody. And I was talking to my girlfriend, Janie, about it. And we both heard it for the first time on a road trip to Colorado last year. And the person is Jersey Gregory. Yes. And he wrote this book called, he wrote a couple books. This is called Happy Body Virtues. And then he also has another one just called The Happy Body. He's this Polish weightlifting champion. And I just want to give him proper credit because that's one of the most on point quotes. If you could wake up every single day and have one quote like pinned to the front of your mind, I think that one would do you pretty good.
Yeah. And the other cool thing about it is like the choices aren't as hard once you get into the activity, the action, right? It's our estimation of it, right? Which is one of the things that I love about Marcus Aurelius and learning from, the Roman emperor, such as Marcus Aurelius or all these other philosophers, is that, the wise people of history have said, look, it's our mind. If we can win the battle over our mind, we can do so much more. And that's why I love having this type of conversation. I appreciate you guys having me on here because this is almost more important than anything else, right? If we can win this conversation, my goodness, what can we do with our life?
I was listening to a book the other day, and in this vein of working out, like I'm 146 days straight, 75 hard.
Heck yeah.
So it's one of those things where what's interesting to me when I get away from this is my new standard of what's I'm capable of has been so ridiculous. So a bad day to me is like somebody else being in the Navy SEALs. Right. And that's something I have to talk to myself about. But I read something the other day and it said, what's crazy? We know what the start looks like. We sure as hell know what the finish looks like because we died. You know what we don't know and can't control? The middle. So ultimately, you just have to get started. And 1 foot, Chad Wright, he runs Navy SEAL, runs ultra marathons. He says, what's so easy for me? Running 256 miles. And they're like, how? And he goes, because it's 1 mile at a time. I don't understand.
Oh, wow.
1 foot in front of the other. And it's one of those things where we create stories, right? Of this, that, and the other, and the fear and all this BS. And ultimately, we don't control what's going to happen. And somebody said to me, the best things that have happened to life to me are things that I didn't even expect.
And it's the standard, right? It's what you expect of yourself. It is the habits that you create. And again, sometimes I have to like pull myself back a little bit because I don't want to sound preachy and all this stuff. And like these discussions to me are invigorating because I'm learning while you're sharing stuff like that. And it's reminding me that we've got to set a standard for ourselves. What do we expect from ourselves? Because we have so much to give. If we understand that there's so much more in the tank, right? When we think about giving up, whether it's work-wise, whether it's working out, whether it's about building relationships, we have so much more. Maybe we've reached like that 30% threshold. We still have 70% to go. But anyway, Anthony, go ahead.
No, I love it. You guys are touching on such good stuff right now. This whole idea of raise your standard and change your life, like that's absolutely true. And it ties back into like the people that we surround ourselves. I want to give credit to Jerome Myers, who said something, I think it was in the very first conversation we ever had with him last year, the first time I met him, he said something to the effect of like, when you die, you get a tombstone. And on that tombstone, it might say something nice like, I was a great person. And then it's going to have the year that you were born and the year that you die. And there's going to be a dash. And in that dash is everything. It's your entire life. Your life happens in that dash. But all you get on the tombstone is a dash. That's it. He's like, and so make the most of that dash. And I was like, that's really powerful stuff. Like really thinking about like what is happening between these ends, because we know how it starts. We know how it ends. And one of the things that's so interesting is that I've always said 80% of success is just showing up. And I think I ripped that off from Woody Allen. So we'll give him credit there. But it's true. Like just showing up and doing the workout or having the conversation, that's 80% of the way there. And the rest is just, following through and doing what you say you will. And so sometimes I think we overblow how scary a thing or how hard it's going to be, because our mind fixates and wants to stay in a state of comfort. And as soon as we start thinking about putting outside of comfort, it starts trying to find reasons to hold us back. And so I think Tim Ferriss has a really interesting strategy for dealing with this, where he takes like all the worst case scenarios, he puts them out on the table and he looks at them and then he evaluates them and says, okay, if this happens, what will I do? If this happens, what will I do? And he kind of game plans. And this is helpful for life, business, relationships. Like if you're dreading doing something, really try and pull the skeleton out of the dark, because once the monster is in the light, like whenever you watch a scary movie, the scariest part of the scary movie is before you see the monster, right? It's the anticipation of what it's going to be, what it's going to look like. And once you see it for the fifth or sixth time, you're like, yeah, I mean, it's scary, but it's not as scary anymore. So first step is get that fear into the light.
Well, there's so much there. And to touch on that, the reason that people don't fix their problems, I deal with a lot of people in recovery, heroin addicts that are trying to turn their life around, is twofold. One, they believe that their story doesn't have merit because of something they told themselves. So they're not allowed access to health because, they weren't that bad. Their life wasn't that bad. Right. And that's how I lived. Right. I grew up on a country club. My dad was a doctor. I didn't deserve to feel bad about my life because it was that, until I met my friend who recovered from cancer twice at 26. And he said, shut the fuck up. He said, you're shit. I said, well, I never went through cancer. And he said, well, let me tell you something, buddy. He said, your problems and your obstacles are yours alone. There's not a different weight to what happened to us. The weight is what we associate with it. Right. And these guys, right, I try to tell them, like, look, that are trying to recover, you look like shit. You need to get a haircut. Your beard's a mess. You're dressed like in a sweatshirt every day. I know, but I don't care about what other people think of me. I get that. But let me tell you something who does care. Your subconscious. Mm-hmm. Your subconscious sees yourself in the mirror that you don't give a shit. And I realize through all the reading I've done and the coaching that 90% of what we do is trained by our subconscious. And every word has weight. Every look has weight. Every thought has weight. And when you understand that aspect of it, you're keeping the personal standards within yourself that are going to elevate your game.
Boom. And you know what it is? At the end of the day, self-image is a cybernetic instrument. That's one that I live my life by. And I try to be conscious of that, right? We got to bring the subconscious to the conscious. It's what do we believe about ourselves? At the core, identity is the most powerful driving force in the human life, right? So what do we believe about ourselves? What do we believe about our money, right? What do we believe about our professional acumen? What do we believe about our fitness? What do we believe about our health? Because sometimes our mind can cure or create disease as well. And if you study science, if you study, some of the groundbreaking stuff that we've literally seen in science, you can see that that's true. I mean, if you guys, any of the listeners have, followed any of Dr. Joe Dispenza's work, I mean, it's unbelievable. But at the end of the day, what you believe about yourself, and a lot of this we may not be conscious of, right? Because sometimes I see people a lot where they will sabotage, their financial capacity or their own personal financial resources, or maybe even their business. And it's because their thermostat on money is set at a certain temperature, and their circumstances, let's say it's the 70-degree thermostat temperature regulation, their circumstances, they received a big windfall and now they're at 90 degrees. Well, guess what? Their cybernetic instrument, their thermostat, is going to regulate them back down to 70, whether it's, hey, I get into a lawsuit, I spend money on stupid stuff, or I just, I don't track where my money's going and things happen, you sabotage. So it's a matter of, what are we not conscious of, and let's bring that to light. Like you said, Anthony, it's an enemy that's hiding in the darkness is more dangerous than one that's in plain sight. So now that we have awareness of this, let's take steps and go through that fear, because the fear is never as bad as it really is in our mind. So I mean, this stuff is so important.
You guys are just like blowing my mind constantly with so much good stuff. It's like hard to I'm over here just taking down notes, but I'm like getting writer's cramp because there's just too many. But what you guys are saying reminds me of the idea that self-esteem is the reputation you have with yourself. And if the reputation that you have with yourself is, I dress like a slob, I don't keep my word, I don't follow through, I eat like junk, and I don't take care of my body, then you know that deep down. And you guys, you've all heard me talk about Maslow and this idea of the +1, in the sense that we know deep down what we're capable of. We know that there's greatness in each one of us. Nobody is born into this world that thinks I'm average. That's just not how we are. We all know that there's something unique and special that we have to give to the world. And when we're not living in alignment with that stated ability, or at least moving towards it, we feel it. We feel it in discontent and unhappiness and dissatisfaction. And that's the reputation that you have with yourself. And that's why your self-esteem then struggles. So as you guys are talking about how do we change these beliefs, I'm curious for you guys. Let's get personal. Let's take it to you guys and myself as well. What are the beliefs that you have or have had that have been the hardest for you to unpack and break down and rewire?
So
I love
that
it.
I deserve to be in this conversation right now.
Mm-hmm. We all do.
No bullshit. I mean, guys, let's just call it what it is. Was I coaching people for free for years, because I enjoyed it and I love impacting people? Yeah. And then I got laid off because of COVID and decided that my coaching career needed to start 5 years earlier. and then you get a client who wants to pay you money. And then the first conversation you have within 2 minutes is, I want to leave my wife. And then your butthole puckers up and you're like, oh, this is the weight of this is so much bigger than me. And I don't take that. Like, you know what I tell my clients? This is fucking true. I actually signed one guy the other day and he's like, I want you to know this money means everything to my family. And I'm taking a chance on you. And I said, I will walk through the fires of hell with this burden on my chest, because when I'm in, I'm all the way the fuck in. But here's the deal. I have to have that conversation with myself every day.
Yes.
Every day.
Yeah. And I'm with you 100% too. I think one thing that has been a really important thinking tool for me is just course correcting and recognizing that I have to recreate myself daily, weekly, monthly, and I have to answer this bullshit, bitch boy voice in my mind that says I can't, that says I shouldn't, or I'm not worthy, or I don't know enough, or I'm an imposter, or these kind of things. Like, these are the voices that I have and that we all have. It's just a matter of bringing it from the subconscious to the conscious, because a lot of us, I truly believe, like, this is, for me, has been a training, it's been a practice, and it continues to be a practice of listening and separating my belief from the voice. But I mean, as far as the voices and the beliefs that I've had to break free from, I mean, how long you got, bro? How long you got? I mean, one thing I'll say, like, from a money perspective, like, I came from the corporate world, right? I came from, middle management and, middle class too. Like, my background was middle class, and I heard the things, my entire life of, hey, money doesn't grow on trees, or we can't do that, we can't afford that, or, and it wasn't like we had dire circumstances. We weren't, struggling to pay the electric bill and things like that. So I do recognize that there was certainly privilege there. But those beliefs took me a long time to unlearn, and I'm still unlearning them in many ways, right? And I have to answer the thought of, hey, is money scarce, or is it abundance, or is it abundant, right? And is it unlimited, or is it limited? And so for me, it's a constant course correction of listening and questioning. But what about you, Anthony? Has there been any like major beliefs that really come to mind for you?
Yeah, there's two that I want to share. One is, it's funny because Austin shared his story about meeting you, and then my story with meeting you was also at a conference. And I don't think we actually sat down and talked in person or anything like that, but you were up on the stage and you're talking about mindset and a lot of the things that you talk about. And at some point you just said something about limiting beliefs. And we all hear about limiting beliefs, and I think when we look internally and say, what is the limiting belief that I have? We can, the ones that we point to the most easily are probably the ones that don't need to get addressed all that quickly. It's the ones that we're not even aware of, the ones that we're sheltering so deeply that we don't even know to look in that nook and cranny of our soul. And at that particular moment, you just never know when the tumbler is going to finally unlock. It's like when you're unlocking, what is it, a safe. The first 3 or 4 numbers that you put in, nothing happens. But then suddenly that 5th number goes in, the whole thing unlocks. And that's there was a moment where I just reflected on, like, what is my biggest limiting belief? And it was one that I held so closely and to my chest that I had never even really thought about it or questioned it. And it was this: I'm not a people person. And I just told myself I'm introverted, I'm quiet, I like being inside my own mind, and I don't like people. I'm a kind of a curmudgeon. And so that kind of sheltered me from ever having to go out there, because I told myself, I don't need to be social. I don't need to go and rely on other people because I don't like people. And when I told myself that, it just became so ingrained. And it's very difficult to succeed in business or real estate or life in anything without people. And so it was a defense mechanism, because at the end of the day, one of my biggest fears is putting myself out there in front of other people so that they could see me. And if I tell myself I don't like people, then it protects me, because I don't have to impress you. I don't have to share anything with you, because why do I care? I don't like you. But if I acknowledge and, like, I do care what you think, that makes me very vulnerable. And I don't like being vulnerable. It's scary. And so I really struggle with that. And so I would say for me, that's been a really big one to try and unpack. The other one that you mentioned was this imposter syndrome. Except for me, the imposter syndrome manifests slightly differently. It's not that I don't feel I don't belong. It's that I question why I'm doing it in the first place. Like, am I doing this because it props me up, it puts me on a pedestal? It's kind of like in the Bible where they talk about, don't flaunt your good deeds in front of people. And I struggle with this because I know my personality is a flaunter. I like people to think that I'm the shit. And I want them, I like, that's me. And if I'm being truthful, like, that's a big motivating reason why I do a lot of things that I do. But I don't like that about myself. And I want it to connect from a more authentic place of, like, helping and having impact. And so as I put things out there, there's always this struggle of, like, why am I doing this? And so those are the things that I'm working on.
Well, don't you think that that's why this is so great between you and I? Because I'm like a people person to a fault.
Yeah, you're the opposite. Yeah.
But that's what I've noticed in business, right? With my business partner in the Airbnb, and then my guy, D, that does all my stuff for me, is that he doesn't have to go be the networker, because that's not his personality. He has my network. And so, it's something that you shared with me from your conference the other day too. Because since you said it, I brought it up about 30 times to people. Selective vulnerability.
Right.
And allowing yourself to tell a shitty part of your story to prop you up on the back end for the come through, instead of just telling the shitty part. And so now when I tell my story, and I also learned this from Pitch Anything too, I tell them half the story and leave them waiting for the rest.
Mm-hmm.
And just letting the vulnerability be the vulnerability. And I don't have a problem with being vulnerable. So that's the least of my concerns. But I also find myself like when I learned leverage in business, I leveraged out too much and then lost some money. So I'm kind of the other way, like I have to like go out there and then like scale it back.
Rein it in.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, one thing I'll talk about when you think about vulnerability, this is one that I do. I will be honest with you. I struggle with being completely vulnerable. It's like, I don't know if you need to know my whole story. I don't even know if you need to know all about me. And it's like, I think there is a balance, right? Because people want to know truthfully what you're all about. But at the same time, they don't want to know, like, hey, I've been crying myself to sleep for the past 78 days. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I think there's certainly a balance. But then the other thing, I'd never heard that term selective vulnerability before. So thank you for sharing that. But I do think that there's a lot, I think, in my opinion, everything is energy. And, as corny and as woo woo as that sounds, I believe it. And science proves it as well. If you look at matter, I mean, it's truly energy coalescing, into the awareness that you've placed your awareness on a particular, whether it's a person, a circumstance, literally a piece of matter, what have you, whether it's a book or otherwise. I mean, anyway, I'm obviously not qualified to talk about this, but I think that energy is everything. When you think about vulnerability, I think at some point it's like, hey, do I feel the getting energy? Or do I feel the giving energy? Right? Am I opening up to show you that, hey, it's possible for you to break free of that story that you have as well? Or is it, hey, I'm showing you that I'm awesome and you should be doing business with me, or you should be giving me your attention, or what have you? And I think there's that little tweak that if you are truly showing up from that authentic place, from that vulnerable place, from a giving perspective, people can feel that, whether they're conscious of it or not. I think that is extremely powerful. So I think everybody should check in with that, right? And it's something that I have to continuously check in with as well, is where is this coming from? Why am I choosing to open up or be vulnerable? I don't know. Does that resonate with you guys?
No, you're
100%.
1,000%, because I'm only telling my story and I'm trying to make it so stupid. Like, I slept in a closet, I was homeless, I was up on meth for a week. So you can go, well, shit, my shit's not that fucking bad. Let me go tell my story. And I'm giving you the power to not, what? Never mind. This is what people say about me. And it's what anybody in the recovery mastermind says. There's no judgment from Austin. That's why we like sharing. That's why people opened up to me in like a minute, because they know there's no judgment of anything that you've done. You could strap a fucking Cabbage Patch on a car and drive 20 miles. And I'd be like, sounds like you had a bad Wednesday. Like, but that's what they want. It's when people feel judgment, when they feel looked down upon, that they crawl into the victim hole and you'll never get them out. I had a guy come to me the other day. Hey, dude, I'm drinking. I'm not going to fucking stop. So just so you know, whatever you're going to fucking say, I'm drinking and I want to, I'm on a 4-day bender. You can kiss my ass. And I said, sounds like you had a crazy 4 days, man. I wish I could join you. I said, hey man, you should totally pour yourself another drink. Nobody thinks that that's the way to say, but when somebody's in the bunker mentality, you don't jump on top of them. You join them in the bunker. You answer some questions, and then once you see a crack of the exposure, then you come in and you talk about, hey, does your son deserve this? Like, my specialty is the victim because I lived it for 20 years. And so you cannot get into a victim mentality with somebody. You have to join them in the bunker. They have to feel needed. They have to feel wanted. And then you can make the change.
God, dude, that's so powerful. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Anthony.
and this gets back to the whole thing that we started this conversation with, which is that identity is the strongest force in the human nature. Like, our desire to be consistent and to live in alignment with whatever vision that we set for ourselves. And that could be a positive image or a negative image. Like, whatever it is, we're going to do whatever it takes to live in alignment with that. So you got to be really careful about what that vision is you set for yourself. So now my question is, how do we change that? How do we start going about changing that identity? And Austin, you've kind of touched on that a little bit from like a coaching perspective. If you're trying to help somebody make and manifest that change, you don't just jump on them. You try and join them and like see that crack of opportunity. But for ourselves, if we're trying to make that identity shift, what do we need to do? How can we go about that?
I've got a couple things I'd like to share on that. I mean, the first one for me that I'm extremely passionate about, I know both of you guys are as well, is feed your mind. Feed your mind. Because your mind is the most powerful tool in the universe. I mean, that's one of the most amazing things about being a human being, is that we have access to infinite intelligence, right? And most people just don't tap into the full resources of your mind, because we're not conscious about feeding it. So let's think about feeding our mind, right? Whether it's reading books, whether it's listening to a conversation like this, whether it's surrounding yourself with other people who are going to push you, right? Whether it's taking the opportunity to face your fears, right? And gain experience and looking at problems as gifts or challenges as an invitation to showing your defiant commitment towards doing whatever it takes to living with passion, living with purpose. So to me, it's about feeding your mind, but it's also about doing that on a consistent and on a daily basis, right? Mm-hmm. What is it that you're listening to? Are you guarding the gates, like we talked about earlier? Are we guarding the gates of your mind against those things that are saying, hey, you should be fearful, right? The world is a terrible place. It's a dangerous place. And if you leave your front door, likely all these bad things are going to happen to you. Or are you feeding your mind with, if you give yourself the opportunity, anything is possible for you, right? Because either of those can be true if you listen to it enough, if you believe it enough, if you water those seeds enough. So that's the first thing for me, is feeding your mind. And there's so many different ways you can do that. But the other piece is, like, this conversation is a perfect example. This in itself is a mastermind, right? Mm-hmm. 3 minds coming together. I mean, like, this is a very dynamic conversation. It would not be this way if we were sitting here, having a conversation with ourselves, right? It can be dynamic, but think about all the new ideas that we've all shared with each other. It's like, wow, I'm like, my paradigm is expanding and shifting. And so it's giving me a new realm of possibilities. So it's surround yourself with the right people who can also feed your mind. So maybe it goes back to that one as well. But that's what I'd add to that question.
I love it. Austin, what do you got, Austin? How can we go about changing our identity?
What I'd like to do with everybody is, so many people in life this is just something I've adopted with my coaching clients and myself, is that I live investing my life off of a lifestyle. This is not PE class. We're not trying to get to a squat or a bench. Are you a person that adopts a healthy lifestyle? And so what do I mean by that? Everybody wants the program, right? What program? 75 hard is going to get me. All these stupid programs. I got to wear the right shoes to the gym. I got to wear the right pants. Listen, stop. You're the program. There's no program. If you walked 10 minutes a day to a positive book and you did that for 30 days straight, I guarantee you your life will be better. But we want to create these ridiculous goals instead of saying, can you move your body? So this is what I do. The basic breakdown of a human being when you're stepping into this, and I'll just use like a coaching client or myself as a thing. We're going to strip you down of your BS stories that you're creating. We're going to go down to 0. And then we're going to add 1 lifestyle trait every day until your new level is set up. And so I'm pretty soft in the first month. Then once I feel like you can take it mentally and you're not going to get offended, then I start beating your ass. And I pummel in this, like, we're going to hold you accountable. We're going to hold you accountable. And then you come out of this where your new standard, like, meaning I move my body 20 minutes a day, I read 10 chapters of a book, I eat healthy, becomes not something that you only do for 5 days or you only do when you're at home. You do it whether you're on the road, whether you're traveling. People ask me, hey, you didn't have water or power last week. Did you work out? Well, what the fuck do you think? Like, because that takes shoes and an outside. But we've created these constructs in our minds, like our clothes are in the drawer instead of putting our shoes and workout gear out, because we want to self-sabotage. So we have an excuse to hang on to say why we didn't do it instead of just going to do it in the first place.
Excuses, man. We all have one, right? So it's a matter of, do we believe that bullshit, or is our vision for our future greater than the vision of that victim mentality, right? Because we can either be, in any moment, we're either expanding or we're contracting in any moment. Literally, like, that's the choice in any decision we make. It's like, I don't know. I don't have any power right now. I don't know. It's cold. But what do you believe about yourself, right? And having that discussion, being willing to snap yourself out of the, I don't know, maybe you're in a trance, right? Maybe a lot of us are in trances. One of my best friends is a therapist. He says that we're in a trance for a very high percentage of time. So we got to snap out of it,
Don't you think it's a combination of excuses and expectations?
I do.
I think because interesting, right? Now, just use it for context. I get a text message from my cousin the other day. He says, hey, young cousin got his heart broken. He's a high level golfer, like PGA Tour stuff. And he's been playing bad because of this girl. And so can you talk to him?
Mm-hmm.
So of course I text him at 5 a.m. on my walk, and I'm like, hey brother, what's going on, man? And he's like, I'm starting to coach some things out of me. He's like, well, this girl, like, we were going to create this life together, and like she was going to be perfect for me, and like do all these things. And like I kept like coaching, I kept like pulling him closer. And then he said something, and he said, yeah, but I guess it wasn't really her. Like, I created the vision of what she was. I said, so let me get this straight. I was like, you're not actually mad at a human. You're mad at a thought of a human. And he goes, 100%. And I said, so technically you didn't get your heart broken. You got your expectations broken. And because you got your expectations broken, she got closer to your heart. And he goes, yeah, great quote, but I'm sad. And I go, okay, well, hold on. I said, no, I said, I respect that. You're sad. I said, but how much do you care about golf? Like, is it everything? Have you put in, 16 hours a day? Of course. I said, so really who you're mad at is yourself, because you created expectations. And he goes, and all he sent back was, okay. So I knew he was pissed. And so then I had to come in with some soft love and say, listen, since I've known you at 6 years old, you were a gangster. Your mindset's killer. You're a great golfer. I said, the world needs the best version of you. And 20 years from now, this girl is going to mean nothing because you're upset of an idea, of a vision. Right, Anthony? Didn't we just do this podcast to me when I got my dream property got ripped from me?
Yep.
Because I already had visioned it, and instead of just working in the results and the execution.
Mm-hmm. I went through it. We've all been there. I think we've all gone through those relationships that when they end, we look back and we're like, this is the end of the world. And I think everybody at this table is old enough now where we look back on that and we go, oof. You almost cringe a little bit because you're like, at the time, it felt like literally the end of the world. And I remember, pretty much every relationship I've ever had that ended until I was like 32. I look back on as it was happening. I was like, this is it. Game over. Life is over. And every time my dad was there to be like, you're going to be okay. You're going to get through it. It's not that bad. But when I was really young, like in college, I really didn't have the mindset yet or the tools to cope with breakups in particular, because like I said, like one of my big things is being vulnerable and letting people in to see me. And so when I let somebody in, like in a relationship, I'm letting them into a very vulnerable part of myself. So when it ends, I take that very, very hard, or I used to. I probably still do. But when I was in college, I still hadn't really created a system for processing that. And this one girl, she broke my heart. And my dad, he comes and he goes, he lets me mope for like a month. And then he comes to me one day and he's like, listen, you are just mopey and sad, and it is just a little bit too much to be around. So he's like, so I'm sending you away to Oregon to go for a week of snowboarding. He's like, just go away, go get in the mountains, go do this thing that you love, go use your body, and just go get your mind off of it. And I was like, fine. And like mopey me, I went to the mountains, had a blast, because when you're in the mountains, you're in a beautiful nature, you're using your body, you're distracted. You come back and you're like, you know what? Like maybe it is going to be okay. Maybe there is something good in life after all. And the science proves this out. It's really interesting. Years later, I would go on to get my degrees in psychology and a master's. And one of the things that I learned, and I found this really interesting, is the difference between end results when we ruminate versus distract. And what the science consistently proves out is that by ruminating on a negative event, we are just reliving it over and over. We're creating this never-ending spiral in our mind. And we feel like by talking it out or by thinking on it like that, we're getting closer to some kind of resolution or closure, as they say. But it doesn't really happen like that. What we need as humans when something negative really occurs is we need distance from it. We need distance to be able to look at it objectively. And so distracting ourselves for a time to give ourselves that distance is what's actually needed. And so what they showed was that, and this is, a psychological study, so it's like, generalized here, is that women tend to ruminate. They want to talk through, an emotional situation when it occurs, and men tend to distract. They're like, I don't want to deal with this. And the outcomes of distracting tend to be better than ruminating on it. And so what I would say to your cousin who's like, but I'm sad. I'm like, I get that. Let's go find something that makes you happy and get you so ingrained in that, like just get your mind off of this. And that Like it might just be a short burst and you come back and you feel sad again. Okay, go do something else that makes you happy. Go distract yourself and keep doing that until you get that distance, because distance is everything.
There's a study, right? And if you talk to people that have been in the recovery space for multiple 20 years, which I have, who run centers and stuff, they've actually found that they're more able to speak and make change by going on a hike in nature than sitting in a room and talking to them. Mm-hmm. Because their defenses are down, they're distracted with the trees, the wind, and they're in a happier state. And when they're in a happier state and not being, because here's the thing, I'm about to finish Pitch Anything. When you're trying to get to somebody, as we're having this conversation, I realize like victim mentality is kind of my specialty now that I'm saying out loud because I lived it, right? But there's 3 types of brains, and the one that starts out hearing anything is the crocodile brain, where the crocodile brain is on pure instinct. So that's why an analytical conversation, or you're trying to get into somebody when you first talk to them, you're not going to get anywhere because they're shutting you out, because the crocodile brain is suspicious from the get.
One thing I'll add to this is, man, you guys are awesome. By the way, this is a great conversation. And I think it's such a great, example of like a breakup, right? Because especially when you're younger, you go through this experience, it like feels like your whole world is crashing down, right? It just feels like, how could this ever happen, right? How could I have been this emotionally committed to someone and then it ends, right? But almost you look back and it's the perfect example of why problems are gifts, right? And so we need references as to different philosophies like that, right? Because on the surface, you hear the phrase problems are gifts and you think, well, yeah, I get that. I'm sure that's awesome in your self-help book, but like, bro, that's not applicable. But like, I don't know about you and maybe all the listeners, if you were to reflect back to like your first breakup and think about those feelings and then look to where you are now, or perhaps what you learned or what resulted through that maybe wasn't apparent. It's like maybe you got with someone else and you learned so much more about yourself, or you became so much more emotionally stable or strong based on that experience. And I can tell you the exact same thing happened to me. I mean, like my first breakup was like, my first like real tough breakup was like early on in college. And it was like, I couldn't think about anything other than that. You know, it was like, oh my gosh. Like I remember I had like a college job, and I remember I literally sold TVs at Sears, believe it or not, which is that kind of dates the awesome. Scenario. But I remember standing there just like moping, and like every conversation I'm having with a customer, I'm like, all I can think about is this awful life that I have. And like, I can't believe this is going on. And, you know, you were talking about, Anthony, how you went out to go snowboard. Did you go snowboarding or skiing?
Yeah, snowboarding.
Okay. So I just got back from skiing last week in Big Sky. And I was thinking about, like, I actually had a conversation with Stephen Kotler, who just wrote a book called The Art of Impossible. Amazing guy. I mean, New York Times bestselling author, Pulitzer Prize winner. I mean, the guy is phenomenal, but he studies peak performance, right? He studies flow. And he told me, I mean, this literally blew my mind, that human beings were designed to go big. And if you go big, first of all, there's going to be problems, right? It's going to be riddled with challenges. It's going to be riddled with, you know, hey, how committed are you to this? And further to that, I'm thinking about skiing. I'm thinking about snowboarding. I'm thinking about accessing a physiological state. And if you think about it, the other thing that he shared with me is that we can either make our nervous system our ally or our enemy. And if we make it our ally, we can do anything. If we make it our enemy, we can't do much, right? And how do we do that, right? We tap into our physiology through experiences where maybe we're moving at fast speeds down a mountain, right? Maybe we're getting our blood flowing, but we're focusing on our physiology, and we're focusing on something larger than ourselves. And if we can tap into that type of state, how resourceful can we be to, you know, create new paradigms, and to look at a problem and say, hey, this is a gift, and give ourselves the opportunity to see the gift, because that's the piece of the philosophy that it's almost the missing link. If you have the opportunity to see it, then you can capture what is next. Does that make sense?
Love it. We're getting towards the end. I want to ask Tyler a question, just because I want to hear a response, because something my coach said to me, and it's something that just came to my mind. That book, by the way, guys, at Next Level. I read all of his books, super amazing, high performance stuff. As a coach, I don't think we should be stressed. And you want to know why? Ever. You want to know why? Because my coach says that you only coach or attract what you've been through.
Mm.
So if you coach what you've been through and you attract these type of people, we already have all we need is already inside of us to coach these people.
Mm. I mean, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, stress is our word for fear, right? We say stress is, oh, well, I got a lot going on. But ultimately, hey, what are you fearful of? And if fear is the calling card towards a greater future, then perhaps it's the meaning that we've made to the event rather than the event itself, right? It's kind of bringing this entire conversation full circle. And the other thing too, and you think about like the capacity of your mind, right? When emotions are high, logic is low. If you want to help somebody else, if you want to capture a greater opportunity, if you want to have a great conversation with someone else, you cannot be in that fear state because fight or flight is not resourceful, right? If you want to be the greatest version of yourself, or if you want to tap into that future version of yourself, it's about recognizing that, hey, my mind is telling me that I should be fearful of this, but I don't have to believe it, right? I can separate myself from that. And now I can step up and serve someone else. I don't know about you guys, but if I get out of myself, that's when I'm so much more present. That's when I'm so much more impactful for other people. It's like, am I focused on myself or am I focused on someone else? So I just think it's so powerful, you guys. I love it.
Yeah, let's wrap this up, guys, because we're getting to the top of the hour and it's been an amazing conversation. But I want to acknowledge that last little bit, Tyler, of when we're focused on ourselves, what we're not focused on? We're not focused on the moment. We're not focused on being present. And when we're not present, I think that's where a lot of issues start to occur, especially when it comes to relationships or business, like whatever it is. And that thing that you said about the meaning of the event versus the event itself, like the meaning that we attribute to what was coming. I think that's just a powerful concept that just ties back to everything that we've been talking about here, which is it starts up here. It starts in your mind. It starts from the perspective that you choose to adopt when it comes to looking at a perspective or a situation and saying, like, is this a thing that's happening to me or is it a thing that's happening for me? And so, Tyler, before we let you go, man, just let the people at home know, where can they get a hold of you if they want to get more of that goodness that you've been spreading our way.
That good. I got that good, man. Yeah, thank you. You guys, this has been seriously amazing. I really appreciate you guys. The best way for people to find me and kind of, engage with me further is to look me up, Elevate Podcast, Elevate with Tyler Chesser on any podcast platform, YouTube, what have you. Go check me out there and learn more about me through that, because I'm extremely passionate about these type of discussions. Because, at the end of the day, I mean, what your past, has presented to you does not have to present your future. And to me, these conversations and this journey and this exploration is really endless. And we can share that with more people. So I'd love to, have your folks come check me out at elevatepodcast.com. Of course, there's so many other places you can find me, but I think that's the best way for me to build a relationship, because that's what I'm all about, man. I'm about long-term value. I'm about long-term relationships, and I'd love to have the opportunity of expanding my relationships with your audience.
And I want to share this too, because I haven't told this to him. I use your story about owning your own multifamily unit by yourself. I must have used it 200 times because
that's awesome.
because I'm trying to get people to understand that the level of to finally slide in a minute of real estate, the level of the actual units doesn't matter. It's the actual cash flow, or let's say the purpose of said asset and what it does for your life, instead of what it says for your life.
Yep.
Yeah. It's about the outcome, right? I mean, I look at, and I know we're wrapping up here, but real estate is a vehicle towards creating outcomes that you want in your life. So that's what I talk about on Elevate. It's like, let's use real estate and let's allow it to leverage our life to a greater capacity, but let's also own our mindset. Let's also own our psychology. Let's also be great leaders. Let's also be great communicators. Let's understand that we can use our nervous system as our ally rather than our enemy. So let's be multifaceted, multidimensional, and let this beautiful thing like real estate give us a greater future. So I love it.
Love it.
I have absolutely nothing more I could possibly add on top of that. Tyler, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. And for you guys that have been listening and joining the conversation from home, because you are part of this conversation, even if you haven't had a chance to voice your words in the audio here, you can go leave comments, you can go leave reviews, you can get in touch with us, guys. We'd love to connect, and we will look forward to seeing you next week.
Perfect.
Thanks for joining us here at the Brain Dump. Now, before you go, it's important to solidify what you've learned here today by taking action. If all you do is listen, then you're only going to retain a small amount of the information you consumed here today. So take a quick moment to really lock in any key insights, tidbits, or pieces of wisdom that you want to carry with you into the future. You can do this by heading over to iTunes and leaving a review with your top 3 takeaways from this episode. If you've already left a review, first, thank you so much. Second, it's time to start a Brain Dump journal. It doesn't have to be fancy, just a slip of paper will do, where you can record a couple quick thoughts from each episode. Science shows this is one of the best ways to ensure long-term retention of new information. And finally, if you've got a brother, a sister, a coworker, or a best friend that you think would benefit from this episode, do them and us a favor and share with them this episode. Your support, as always, means the world to us.